make sure your microphone is muted, so to avoid any background noise unless you're until you get ready to ask a question. So welcome everyone. It's a beautiful weekend. Glad everyone is with us. Rabbi Gary Creditor is back with us again to complete his discussion on post-biblical Jewish literature and the creation of Judaism. Please remember that he will be referring to this handout, which you received by email and in the mail. So if you have it close by, please have it handy for you. A few other announcements before we get started. Please remember that the drive-through Advent gathering will be held on December 6th from 1 to 3 p.m. And if you haven't already received your FP Seasons booklet, there you go, Mary D. Thank you. That booklet Mary D. is holding up. If you haven't received that already, you should have. So if not, please call the church office and they'll make sure they get you one. Also, please note that next Sunday, due to the Thanksgiving holidays, there will be no Sunday school class or live worship service next Sunday. So I'll send out an email reminder on that as well, but just take note of that. Also, please remember, if you'd like to ask a question during class, we will be pausing periodically. So just raise your hand or type that you have a question in the chat function, or you can simply type your question into the chat function and we'll pause to field those questions as they come in. Please keep those in the military and those on the special concerns list in your thoughts and prayers. As you have probably heard by now, and you received an email of this from me earlier this week, that please keep Nancy Dahl and her family in your thoughts and prayers as her son, Stephen, who was 59 years old, passed away on November the 7th. So let's see, Wilson, that's all the announcements I have. If you don't have anything else, Rabbi, we'll turn it over to you. Looking forward to our next session here.
Thank you very much, and good morning to all. And again, we join in prayers for all those that are afflicted with the virus and hope for people's speedy recovery, as well as for a quick, expedient rollout of this vaccine, the vaccines that can help save us. I want to deal with one question that came up that Mary D. forwarded me last night, and I thank whoever asked it, and I'm curious afterwards where you got it from, but not that it's so hidden, but it's not really on the front page of anything. There is a group in Jerusalem mostly called the Neturei Karta. To Aramaic means the guardians of the city. Its origin in the Talmud has nothing to do with this group, but they just took the words from there. And I need to just to answer with a 2-minute kind of background. Since the destruction of the temple, from the time of Jesus, this whole what we call Second Temple period, there became a great messianic yearning. First was to get rid of the oppression of Rome. I think I dealt with this in one of my previous classes with you. But after the destruction of the temple and the second revolt against Rome by the Bar Rebellion in 135 CE, the Jewish people were powerless and thus subject to whatever whims of history would occur. Those I don't have to detail, just as a great broad statement. And embedded into Judaism was a messianic yearning, if even short of the Messiah, but certainly of the return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel and renewal of Jewish autonomy, etc. When that first became a reality, a possibility, at the end of the 1800s, with the Zionist vision by Theodor Herzl, who saw the Dreyfus trial in France, and when the streets ran full of people saying "Death to the Jews," place of liberté, égalité, fraternity, some of the core values of America. Herzl saw that we need to reestablish Jewish autonomy in the land of Israel. That political movement was never accepted by a very, very small fringe, and I mean microscopic, but vocal. They didn't really coalesce into as a group until really in the 1930s. And that's when they took their name, Neturei Karta, and they have rejected the state of Israel, its existence, as illegitimate, rejected Zionism, rejected everything of the state of Israel, except that they live there and they're protected by the army and the defense forces. But you will see from time to time where they pop up out of nowhere. Nobody knows how many there are, from a few hundred to a few thousand, and that's all there is to it. They have made relations with Arabs for whatever reason, but in terms of the rejection of the state of Israel, they don't understand. Where they come from is a sense of messianism that currently is not fulfilled for us. And certainly the state of Israel is not a religious state, it's a political state, and came through all the forces that needed to come to make it come into existence, etc. They have rejected it entirely. And that's who the Neturei Karta are. They don't represent anybody, they're not in the Israeli parliament, they don't hold. And there are other Jews that have difficulty accepting the reality of the state of Israel, but not like the Neturei Karta. They are far off the far side of the spectrum. So whoever asked the question, thank you for it. They leave us no writings to worry about, so we don't have to deal with them either. Let me get back to where I was from last week. And again, if there are questions, I have a whole bunch of boxes that are names and no faces. So if you're going to say something from those boxes, they're going to have to do it through the chat and somebody will see it for me. I want to see if the screen will do any justice to this. We'll see what happens. Somebody asked last week about a Jewish pope. If you look at this page, I can see that you see it because I see it. This is one of what's called the four Turim, the four columns, the four separations of recapitulation of Jewish law. The text is here in the middle. Don't worry about not being able to read it. It's in Hebrew and a million different fonts, okay? But this is the text. Around the border, I'm going to raise it higher, are all these other commentaries. They're not explaining, they're having a little to-do on different issues. They don't always agree with what he wrote in the middle, and he doesn't have to agree with him. So that the argumentation over issues, besides clarifications, goes on after a text is edited and published. So when you have on this page, over here where it says the four Turim, and I gave you on page, it'll appear on page 5, where I numbered them, Roman numeral 8, from Rabbi Yaakov ben Harosh, quotes Baal HaTurim, the author of the Turim, living at the end of the 13th century, 1240, and he creates this format. He recapitulates Jewish law, not in the Talmudic fashion, which I showed you in terms of its organization on page 3. I know you have to flip pages a lot, but this is the organization of the Talmud. He recapitulates it all in 4 sections. Orachayim, the laws of daily life, Yoredeo, laws of prohibition and permission, Even HaEzer, personal laws, and Chosh and Mishpat, civil laws, loans, court procedures, etc. And after it's published, not everybody's happy. And you will have not only cross-pollination, you'll have a cross-argumentation going, and that's how it sets up. So if whoever's accepted him, very nice, mazel tov, but then you'll have argumentation going around the page as it finally gets printed. This won't be the last word on the matter because it will look the same to you, but I'm going to pull a different volume. Later on, in the end of the 15th century, will be issued, one of the guys in the middle of the column on that book, he edits his own book. called the Code of Jewish Law. It looks very similar because it is similar. It is set up in the same 4 sections, and the text again is printed in the middle, and you have the commentators and argumentators, I will call them, around the page. So if you ask about a particular issue, I can't just put a pin through the middle of the book. I got to go all around the borders. And a thorough study would mean I have to learn the middle guy, what he's saying, whether it's either volume, and then go along the columns and see what's going on in general, either in the same time frame or later on in generational, so that you have a continual evolving of Jewish law. And so the Shulchan Aruch, the last one I just picked up, is number 8 in my lineup, and it is written by Joseph Cairo. It was not. He was a person from the Mediterranean world, so European world had issues with some of his positions, and so in my letter G, there are glosses by a person by the name of Moses Isserles. He added the Ashkenazic, namely European traditions, and put together that became the accepted book. Since then, there's only been one other book ever issued in the same format, namely, instead of saying Shulchan Aruch, flip the words, I didn't type them in Aruch HaShulchan, from the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. And that's where I think I referred to him that, did I tell you about the issue of man-made matzahs? Did I bring that up in this class? No, didn't do it. At the end of the 19th century, matzah was made in ovens and handmade. It wasn't good for mass distribution, but it worked for, basically. But came to America, they created machinery, and the question of could you have man-made matzah because the dough would stick on the machinery and it wouldn't be baked in time, etc. Issues like that wouldn't be in the earlier books because there's no such thing as man-made machinery. Just like we had to deal with the issue of Zoom on the High Holy Days. No book's going to have Zoom in it. It's just a modern issue. So this book, the last set that really was written in the same format, bringing up new issues in the same location. So if you gave a citation, you could just go from book to book to book. That one. So to reinforce my high, I said in the very beginning, for those people who look at Judaism, and I'm going to pull it out and say, I gave you page 2, and say, this is the old, what you would call the Old Testament. Okay? And I did it specifically to show you what books we do not have in that you have in New Testament. And no pseudepigrapha, no apocrypha, no Dead Sea Scrolls. The Old Testament is this, page 2, for us. Okay? Then you don't know Judaism. You know the foundation of Judaism, but you do not know Judaism. Judaism in here is priests, tabernacle and temple, sacrifices, libations, bringing of the first fruits, all those things, which doesn't happen in the modern synagogue, in the synagogue. And so the synagogue and Judaism, which already began, as I said, there was an oral tradition that had to exist along with the written tradition, but that oral tradition has the power to evolve into the Judaism that exists today and continues to evolve as we live. One of the things that was done, let me pause for a second. If somebody sees chats or anything else, because my machine keeps pinging from other reasons. Is there any questions that have come up any place? No, I keep rolling along. Okay. So I gave you this one long sheet, which kind of puts into place lots of things that I'm not going to talk about, but some of them that I have. And you will see the columns of Bible, which at one point is Bible commentary, Talmud, creation, and the continuing documents created on Talmud, law codes. I've talked to you some of those. Liturgy, I haven't spoken about it all, but liturgy is also where we show our theology. And so you have the creation of liturgy in a continuous fashion. We really didn't write books about thought and ethics until you get into the year 1000. I mean, this is just a handful of things that's not, same thing with mysticism, and we really didn't write history until much later on either. So in terms of you come to the synagogue or you see someone who's Jewish who's observing Judaism, it is what you see in terms of the Old Testament is like the iceberg motif. That's just what's showing is above the waterline. Most of the Judaism is all the rest that's down below. And so that's how we as a religion have evolved and continue to do so. Today, if there's no other questions for the moment, I'm going to say, want to just 1 second. I know I should have put this. I put that one out of order, I think. One other thing I want to refer to is page 11, and that is a group of people from the basically the 9th and 10th, 8th, 9th, and 10th centuries in Babylonia, which was a really phenomenal time of evolution of Judaism. These are the people and the era after the Talmud is closed, who's going to do the editing of the Talmud, the organization of the Talmud, and begin something that is continued to this very day, and we'll look at the end of the class. Namely, is what's called the responsa literature, Q&A. So when Judaism, the main focus of Judaism is going to move from Babylonia, it will not move the Fertile Crescent this way towards the land of Israel or across and then into Turkey. That's not going to happen that way. It's going to happen across from Babylonia. It's going to come across and go to North Africa. And the North African Jewry will be a very rich in terms of, not monetarily rich, though they become okay, but in terms of rich in terms of Jewish learning and Jewish development. The headquarters, the main communities across North Africa. And in their earlier years, they will send questions from North Africa to Babylonia, and these guys will answer them. And we have many, many of the questions and answers that shows us their evolving Judaism, and as they confront new questions of their reality, as well as clarifications of what older generations said or did. So I should have put this earlier, but I really didn't know where to stick it. But be that as it may, this page, page 11, is a time frame and beginning group of people. Famous ones, Sharira Gaon in the 10th century, and Hai Gaon at the same time period, and then Saji Gaon down here. These are the famous sages of this period who really bridge from the Talmudic era to the Codes era. And thus they are able to, we see through the questions and answers their development. That Q&A has never stopped. And in fact, I think it was just I referred to it that this past year, when the reality that Passover last April, I don't know what we were thinking last February and March when this pandemic really started taking hold in America, at least. But certainly it came towards Passover. I wasn't traveling up to New York to the family. They weren't coming down here. I was intending to go to Israel. This wasn't going to happen. How do you do Passover when you're alone? And so Zoom to the rescue, or whatever other programs to be. And so my wife and I, there was a decision to be made. I don't normally use electricity in this fashion on the holidays and on Sabbath. What do you do? Well, before anybody gave a specific answer, people were making decisions. And then when it came for the high holidays, those Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and the New Year, and the Day of Atonement, this past September, nothing was open. And therefore, we all clustered around this little screen, or if you put it into something bigger, a bigger screen. And that's how we worshiped. There was a formal question asked to the Committee of Law and Standards of the Rabbinical Assembly of the Conservative Rabbinate. Is this permissible? And not only is it permissible now, what happens in the future when we can go back to synagogue? All right, when this pandemic, God willing, will be over, and whatever normal will be, how do we live in the new normal? So a detailed question was asked and a detailed answer was given. So this responsa literature, the Q&A literature, is alive and vital and operating. And Judaism is continuing to evolve in an organized fashion from now on into the future. Let me again pause for the moment and ask, are any questions coming up? I don't see hands, but are any in the chat? I can't see that either for the moment. I see a question in the background behind you. Mary D., your husband.
Question about Alexandria. How did Alexandria, with the Christian religion, fit in with the Jews of North Africa? Was Alexandria part of that North Africa movement?
There was, Alexandria was a very, very fertile city in terms of intelligentsia, in terms of learning, etc. More than Christianity affected Judaism, the interaction with Islam did. Okay, that's I would have to refresh a great deal to be able to say too many things intelligent on that. But we don't get Maimonides. If you look on my main list here, Maimonides around the year 1200, he will his writing in a philosophic vein is influenced by Islamic writing, not by Christian writing. There was obviously, we know, interaction between communities, but the greater influence was Islam than Christianity. Other questions? Do you see anybody else have other questions for me to pause at? Okay.
I don't see them right now.
No, okay. What I thought to do now was to go through some, I gotta move it. Go through some examples of some of the things over time. And if people have with them page 7, actually, go to page 7, then we'll jump to page 8. I'm going to look at it's called Midrash Halacha. It is in the right-hand side of my original first page where it says Halachic Midrash, and it's a formula on how do you learn new laws out of biblical texts, things that are not in the biblical text. So on page 7, there is, and where I put the arrow, it says the following. The following example considers the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 24, verse 16, which says, fathers shall not be put to death for sons, nor sons for fathers. It's important to see there's a semicolon there. It's a full break. A man shall be put to death for his own sin. You have two halves of a sentence, okay? And you might think that that's a very straightforward sentence. It is not. Turn to page 8. This is from the halachic midrash called Sifrei on the book of Deuteronomy. It's a book separate from the Talmud, but it's the Talmudic, it's a process in which laws are learned, and they will be assimilated into the Talmud or into the later codes. This is exactly what is written there. It's a good translation. Fathers shall not die for sons. What does this clause come to teach us? That fathers shall not die for sons, nor sons for fathers. So the question is asked, does it not already say, second half of the sentence, a man shall not die on account of his own sin, shall die on account of his own sin? In other words, why do you need the first half if you have the second half of the sentence? Answer, rather it comes to teach that fathers shall not die through the testimony of their sons. Okay? What does it mean, die for theirs? It means testimony, nor sons through the testimony of their fathers. And not only that, and when it says and sons, there's one Hebrew little letter, say, vav, saying u, it means to include other relatives, as these are brother, father's brother, his mother's brother, his sister's husband, and husband of his father's sister, the husband of his mother's sister, his mother's husband, his father-in-law, and his brother-in-law. So where do you get that these people cannot testify against this person? It's a rabbinic learning, it's a drash, and the literature is midrash, from this verse in Deuteronomy that has two distinct halves. So one says a man should not should die on the account of his own sin, namely what he's done. What do you do with the first half of it? We extrapolate from it in this process that others cannot testify against him. I'm not sure what to do with it in modern application in terms of today's politics. We'll leave it alone. So when it says, to conclude the paragraph, when it says, a man shall die on account of his own sin, that first half of the sentence means fathers die on account of their own transgression and sons die on account of their own transgression. This, I left the rest of the article, most of the, not the continuing pages, but the beginning of it to this point, just as an example to show you that you have a verse in the Torah that seems very simple, but under the microscope and the magnifying glass of the rabbinic process called midrash, we can extrapolate, we can drash out from that verse new meaning, create new laws, which then become the part of Judaism, and eventually will show up in the codes that we enumerated. They'll come later in time from here. I use this simply because it really was so clear an example of rabbinic midrash. From the same time period, we'll move over to page 9. And likewise, it's going to be similarly in page 10. This one I found to be, there's a book called Talmud and Law, by Harry Gersh. This is really for teenagers, and they boil it down to something as simple. So I thought this page would do. And the second page is that I have there. If a pregnant Mishnah, a learning that was formalized by the year 200 CE by Rabbi Judah the Prince, in the Mishnah it says, if a pregnant woman smells food on Yom Kippur and says, I must have it, she must be given it until she feels restored. Having have 3 children, I had, I've had experience with this. Not a Yom Kippur necessarily, but a sick person, which is not so uncommon, obviously, is fed on Yom Kippur on advice of experts. And if no experts are there, one feeds him at his own wish until he says enough. Now, Yom Kippur, you're not supposed to eat from sunset to sunset. That is one of the major pieces of Yom Kippur. No eating, no drinking. All right? Okay. Now the Gemara, in the conversation that will occur between the years 200 and 500, thereabouts, there is this conversation that is constructed. Namely, it didn't necessarily happen the way it's written, but the editors put the conversation together from the pieces. Our rabbis taught, if a pregnant woman smells either kosher meat or pork, tells me they're not living in the land of Israel, wherever they might be, and she says she must eat some, we put a straw into the juice of the meat and place it in her mouth so that she gets the aroma. If this satisfies her craving, it is well. If not, one feeds her the juice. I have to imagine a rabbi is sitting around somewhere, thinking about what to do in these situations. 1 second, that should not have happened. 1 second, sorry. Okay, goodbye. Okay. Modern technology. Okay. If not, one feeds her the juice. If her craving is satisfied, it is well. And if not, one feeds her the meat itself, for there is nothing that can stand before the duty of saving a life, with the exception of idolatry, rape, and murder. In Judaism, you may violate every other commandment but those 3 in order to save a life. When I was working with UNOS down in Virginia Beach, I was involved with some of that, and the issue of what is the paramount thing in life to do when we talk about what's going on now in the pandemic. For Judaism, I can set aside every law I've got. Remember, I said the 613 doesn't work. We've got myriads of rabbinic laws and traditions, and when it comes down to saving a life, everyone goes by the board except for 3. Idolatry, sexual crimes, besides rape, but sexual crime and murder. So the Talmud continues this conversation. How do we know this, that one may, if necessary to save a life, violate any commandment except those against rejecting God, rape, and murder? So one rabbi is named, Rabbi Eliezer says, since scripture says, with all your souls, what does it add when it says with all your might in Deuteronomy? So he answers, with all your souls refers to a person who cherishes life more than money. With all your might refers to a person who money is dearer than life. So why do I have the second clause? Okay, the first clause tells me life is most important. How do we know, the Gemara tells you, that you cannot commit murder or rape even to save your own life? Namely, if somebody says, if you don't murder person X, I will murder you. You're not supposed to do that. If you're supposed to do is sexual sin against another person, or I will do it to you, you're not supposed to do it. We are told, for as when a man rises up against his neighbor and slays him, so is this matter, which deals with rape, law against rape. So they make a comparison. So just as it is lawful to save a woman from rape at the cost of the would-be rapist's life, so it is with murder. And as with the case of rape, so that is with an order to needlessly shed the blood of another, one should allow oneself to be killed rather than violate this commandment. So again, the Talmud is, how do we get to make such a statement in the top part of the Mishnah? The Talmud goes through a conversation. And how do we know that this principle applies to the case of murder? There was a man who came to Rava, another rabbi, and said, the Lord of my village told me, kill so-and-so, and if not, I shall kill you. Rava answered, let him kill you, but do not kill. What makes you think your blood is redder than his? Well, perhaps the blood of that man is redder than yours. So you see from a simple conversation in the very beginning of the Mishnah about a pregnant woman needing sustenance, or a sick person needing sustenance, or perhaps they might die. This conversation that follows goes far deeper. And so the last piece is, sick person is fed on Yom Kippur at the word of experts. Rabbi Yanai said, if the patient says, I need food, while the physician says he does not need food, we listen to the patient. I can imagine it's going on in some hospital rooms. Okay. What is the reason? Because it's a verse in Proverbs. We just give it a little substantiation. The heart knows its own bitterness. The heart knows person knows what he needs. And if the physician says the patient needs food while the patient says he does not, then we listen to the physician. Now, why? The patient is probably so weak he can't tell the truth. This kind of learning, I'm not going to have time to do page 10, but it's a similar vein, is a methodology of explanation and explication to take from simple literature, a simple verse, and open up the possibilities of what that verse means and how can we apply that verse. That's Judaism. It's not just a verse in Deuteronomy, because the simple verse in Deuteronomy says, do not put a stumbling block before the blind. What do you mean? I just have to have a blind person and I don't put a block in front of him? That's the only way this verse means? What does it mean to a person buying a house and the seller doesn't tell him he's got this in the attic and that in the basement and this in there and that in there? You know, put a stumbling block has many applications. And rabbinic law will bring forth those, and since the subject never ends, then the utilization of the Talmudic and the Drash method continues to this day. So I'm going to, bring this to a pause, I guess, by looking at page 12. There was responsa written during the Holocaust, Q&A, the continuing evolution of Judaism and its responses to the challenges at every moment during and after the Holocaust. And in this book that I have, Responsa Anthology by Abraham Yaakov Finkel, there is this, there's these 2-page pieces. I think we'll only have time for one, and I'll do it quickly. The question was asked, during the Nazi occupation of Poland, the Nazis, in an attempt to collect all furs owned by Jews, announced that whoever did not hand over his furs would be shot. 3 Jewish elders were assigned to run the collection. They were warned that they would pay with their lives if anyone was found hiding a fur. After all the furs were surrendered, the Germans made a search and found 1 fur hat. The owner was shot on the spot. The 3 Jewish elders were beaten and tortured, so that one died of his injuries, the second hovered between life and death, and the third one was still conscious. This third elder was the father of the person who was submitting the present question. As the son was watching his father's agony, the Nazi soldier said to the son, "If you give me your gold watch, I'll shoot your father with my gun so he won't have to suffer any longer." The son handed his watch, and the Nazi killed his father. Now the son is deeply depressed, thinking he may have done wrong by bringing about his father's death. He thinks that God might have performed a miracle and saved his father, and that he, the son, caused his father's death. Okay? I've dealt with people who had to make the decision of pulling the plug on their loved ones in the hospital. That very bad phrase, but that's the simplicity of the language. And they don't know what to do. They come to the moment, they make a decision, and then they do it, and then they are haunted by the decision they made. It's not a totally different question than this. It's a parallel side. This was the answer, Q&A. Not on. This time is not on straight law and not on rituals. Responsum. Woe to is us that things like that happened in our lifetime, and what is more painful is that we have almost forgotten everything that those accursed evil, Rishaim, have done. They murdered the best of our people, hardly anyone escaped. And although we are all survivors of the Holocaust, tormented and aching from head to toe, we are beginning to forget. May God forgive me for writing these lines, but no one can escape reliving his agony when he sees what these accursed creatures have done. Every day their perfidy becomes more clear, and I myself have tasted this cup of bitterness, as you know. We just observed the 75th anniversary of the beginning of the Nuremberg trials, by the way, after the war. We may bring parallel in our case to the Gemara in the tractate called Avodah Zarah, 18a is its pagination, which relates the story of Rabbi Hanina ben Tradion, whom the Romans wrapped in a Torah scroll, which they set afire after placing wool and sponges on his chest to retard his death. The executioner said to him, "Rabbi, if I stoke up the fire and remove the sponges to hasten the agony of the end of your agony, will you promise me everlasting life? Is it okay for me to aid and abet your death?" All right, that's what he's asking. And the rabbi replied to him, "Yes." He said, the executioner said, "Swear it to me." And like Hanani ben Tradion swore to him. The Roman immediately stirred up the fire and removed the sponges. As the rabbi died, the executioner jumped into the pyre. Then a heavenly voice was heard saying, "Rabbi Hananiah and his executioner are ready to enter the world to come." This story proves that since Rabbi Hananiah was about to die, he was permitted to ask the executioner to remove the sponges and advance his death. We can also adduce proof from the death of the occupants of Masada at the end of the first revolt, who killed one another to avoid being wiped out by the attacking Romans, as we are told by Josephus. In my opinion, now you get down, we've got the argumentation, we got the setup of the details, and now we get to the final conclusion. In my opinion, since the father would have been killed in any event, the son, by saving his suffering father from excruciating pain, performed the mitzvah. However, now you can make a statement, then somebody else can start deducing something else from that statement. He now wants to close the door on that deducing. However, no inference may be drawn from this, God forbid, for permitting hastening the death of a sick person or euthanasia, for this is tantamount to murder, which I handled in the other page. It applies only in the case where a person was being killed, etc. This is part of, and I think I almost make it to the timeline. Do I have any more minutes left? A few more? Okay.
Yeah,
one
you've
more
got
minute.
about 8 minutes left, and I've got a question in the chat. But finish your thought if you want.
This type of literature, both moral on morals, as well as on traditions, whether I can use Zoom on the holidays, and all of these questions, is the continuing development, unfolding of Judaism. And and when I first spoke to Mary D about, what should we do to these two sessions? When I made the throwaway comment, there's more about Judaism below the waterline than above the waterline. I wasn't kidding. Judaism is really, as a living faith, not contained in the Old Testament. That's the foundational documentation, but everything that came above it, or below, whichever way you want the motif, and develops from it. That is the living Judaism that exists today. And with that, I will pause for the question because I'll probably need to take the rest of the time for the question. Now, Mary D., what's my question?
It says, you used the example of Zoom and technology as a new decision or commentary for Jewish life and actions. Are there current issues that are still undecided as to how to act? Thinking of women as religious leaders / transgender rights / etc.
Okay, the answer is yes. Now, depending on where you are within the Jewish circle, namely from Reform, Conservative, and Orthodoxy in three big swatches, some of those questions have been dealt with and some of them have not. Conservative Judaism and Reform Judaism have completely accepted women in terms of clergy, in terms of religious leadership. They are cantors. They are ordained as women, as cantors and as rabbis. They've been educators for a long time. Within Orthodoxy, that is a continuing evolution. Orthodoxy is its own umbrella of more liberal to more stringent. That's my Nature Carta off to the far deep, muddy right-hand side of the spectrum. And their women are slowly in the left-hand side of their spectrum, the more liberal part of Orthodoxy, making inroads. I was just listening to a Zoom from Israel where for women to be accepted in certain places in Israel, which have never happened before. It's not going to happen so quickly now, but there is that. Transgender and the LGBTQ population, again, within conservative and reform parts of the community are totally accepted. Yes, you can have individuals in any group that say no, but as the group, as the postures, yes. In Orthodoxy, in terms of acceptance, again, that will be more variation, not as leadership, that's for sure, but that will change too, maybe, probably over time. We are facing medical issues, with new technology. I mean, transplantation, which Mary D, you've been so involved in a career, this was originally they only accepted eyes to be transplanted. And, to the whole Jewish argumentation about transplantation was quite arduous. And when I was in rabbinical school and then began my rabbinate, this was a hotbed issue. In the 70s, they were first really moving along into transplantation. And how do you get people to accept it? How do you work with families? This was, again, another issue. So there are continuing issues that are on the docket. And because our community has really separate sections, the Reform movement, the Conservative movement, the Orthodoxy, which has its very large umbrella, different parts of the community handle these questions differently. We all can relate to I have shelves of responsive literature on different questions, which could be a course unto its own self for many, many mornings, but on taking certain issues. But time doesn't allow us to ever say we're done. Every day opens a new one. There are people say, can we take this vaccine? That will be a question. There are people who will ask, is it because I need to save a life, but am I sure I'm saving a life? How do we look at this whole thing? I'm sure that there will be questions and answers given, written in the next period of time as these become real. So I see there's one more. That was the one in the chat, or is there anything else there?
I don't see anything else in the chat. Anybody
Okay.
want to raise their hand and ask something?
Okay.
You've got three minutes.
Okay, then very quickly, the last page that I gave you, page 13, is a similar one to the first one, but a little bit different. It asks when a person, his brother went to sleep, and he wound up leaving him by the side of the road when they were marching. And he remembered his brother too late, and he never heard from his brother again, and assumes that his brother was killed. And now he doesn't know how to handle his feelings. I want you to look to the bottom, for those who have it, and look at the very bottom left column. It says, throughout halakhic literature, Jewish legal literature, the poskim, those are the deciders in all their different communities, writing their books, discuss the question of whether forgetting is due to negligence or is an unintentional, unavoidable circumstance. You can take that phraseology, and then use it in multiple places beyond this question that was asked here, that comes out of the Holocaust. And his answer is, and if you look to the middle of the right-hand column, his answer is going to be, Rabbi Akiva replied, it is written, let your brother live alongside you. The implication is your life takes precedence over your brother's life. Since the halacha is decided according to Rabbi Akiva, he surely would not have jeopardized his life. For those who get the Times Dispatch, this is the way I'll close. Who got into the lifeboat of the Titanic and who didn't? Now, you can't stand there on the deck as the ship's going down and have an argument. I mean, throw somebody in, pull somebody out, whatever. But after the fact, we look at situations and we learn from them. That's the halachic process. And when it comes up situations, we have a background conversation on how to refer and respond. This is the continuing evolution of Judaism, which was why I need more shelves in my library to hold more books. I thank First Presbyterian for this opportunity to learn with you these 2 Sundays. I wish everybody the best of health, continuing to be well and be strong in these days ahead. And thank you to Mary D, to Drake, and to Wilson for all of the assistance in putting all this together. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you, Rabbi
Thank
Credita. As usual, that was very interesting. 2 sessions, and I'm sure all of us who joined in here learned a lot from you. It's always good to learn about different religions other than just our own. So it's a pleasure having you, and we hope you'll come back and visit with us again in the future.
Look forward to that opportunity. Thank you.
Yes. And to everyone else, please have a safe and happy Thanksgiving. Remember, there is no class or live worship service next week. Rebecca Weaver will be with us for 3 sessions in December. So we'll look forward to having her. But everybody, and please remember to join the live worship service at 10 o'clock today. But once again, have a safe and healthy Thanksgiving, and we'll see each other back on December the 6th.
Okay.
Bye-bye.